Another military police alert. "20 continuous days of announcements, threats, psychological warfare after 20 days of siege against the Venezuelan nation. Today we are stronger than yesterday. Today we are more prepared to defend peace, sovereignty, and territorial integrity than yesterday." Attention, President Gustavo Petro, have you given an order today? To reinforce the entire Catatumbo area with 25,000 new troops. Colombian. So the coordination of Binational Zone number 1 is moving forward. For the good of sovereignty, peace, and the prosperous future of our border people. We watch over, care for, and preserve our land ourselves, Venezuelans and Colombians united for peace, prosperity, and sovereignty. I have told him, I have given the order to Minister Padrino to call again and talk with Minister Sanchez, the Minister of Defense of Colombia, and to continue coordinating so that Binational Zone Number 1, which on the Venezuelan side includes El Táchira, is maintained.
You are seeing Nicolas Maduro thanking someone, but that gratitude left many people confused and surprised. Maduro was there, thanking none other than...
The President, Gustavo Petro, has given an order today to reinforce the entire Catatumbo area with 25,000 men and new force on the ground.
Dictator Nicolas Maduro thanked the President of Colombia, Gustavo Petro, for reinforcing security on the border between the two countries. This comes amid the approach of United States military ships in the region.
Even Maduro is thanking the President of Colombia, Gustavo Petro. The same Petro who just a few months ago said that the Venezuelan elections were rigged, the same Petro who refused to recognize the result. Now the two are on the same side. Recently, 25,000 Colombian soldiers marched to the Venezuelan border.
This reinforcement of regional security is happening at the same time as United States warships approach the Venezuelan coast.
But why did this radical move happen exactly now? Why did Petro abandon his opposition to Maduro? And what does this have to do with the American warships that are sailing in the Caribbean waters at this very moment? To understand this unlikely alliance, we need to take a closer look at what was going through Gustavo Petro's mind when he made this decision. Contrary to what many think, he didn't become friends with Maduro overnight. A bigger issue is at play. Colombia has already received almost 3 million Venezuelan refugees in recent decades. This is the largest group of Venezuelan refugees in the world. Petro knows very well that if the United States applies military pressure that further destabilizes Venezuela, he could receive more. Hundreds of thousands of people crossing the border, and the country simply doesn't have the infrastructure to absorb that many people. Knowing this, Petro had to make a choice. Stop. It's better to support Maduro now and try to avoid a conflict than to deal with a new massive wave of refugees later. And that's exactly why he sent 25,000 soldiers to the border, as a demonstration that he won't just stand by if the situation escalates. But what's really at stake here goes far beyond just a simple refugee issue. That's because the United States is not planning a traditional invasion of Venezuela. Donald Trump and his team are applying what experts call coercive diplomacy. In other words, this is a strategy that uses the threat of military force to force an internal political change. And to achieve that goal, Trump did not hold back. He sent 7 warships and 4,500 soldiers to the waters near Venezuela. Officially, they say it's to fight Latin American drug cartels, And this justification of fighting drugs is no coincidence. It serves to provide a legal basis for the operation. And it resonates with a real concern of the American public, which is the opioid crisis. But the composition of this military fleet tells a different story. We analyzed the equipment sent more closely. It's clear that this is not a simple anti-drug operation. And here is the key point that explains why Colombian and Venezuelan troops are concentrating exactly in this specific region. Everything revolves around Maracaibo, a city in the west of Venezuela. This is not just any city, it's the heart of Venezuela's oil industry. And here we have one of the greatest ironies of today. Venezuela has the largest oil reserves in the world, even larger than Saudi Arabia, but it can't supply gasoline to its own gas stations. But talking about the American strategy, it's much smarter than it seems at first glance. That's because they don't need to patrol the entire extensive Venezuelan coast. It's enough to control this small area of Maracaibo, this bottleneck through which the oil tankers pass that carry the main source of revenue for Maduro's government. It's like squeezing a main artery. If you cut off the flow of oil money, the regime can't sustain itself. The oil terminals in Maracaibo are literally the economic lifeline of the regime. Decades of mismanagement, corruption, and international sanctions have reduced Venezuela's complex economy to a single fragile source of revenue. That's why the Venezuelan and Colombian military mobilization has focused precisely on this region. They correctly anticipated that any American military action would focus on this point, which is more vulnerable to the pressure exerted by the Americans. It's more than just naval presence. The United States has doubled the reward to $50 million for information leading to the capture of Maduro, accusing him of leading a scheme that traffics drugs into American territory. In addition to that, they have seized more than $700 million in Maduro's assets, including luxury items, private jets, and mansions. According to the Peruvian investigative reporter Jaime Bailey and the NTN 24 network faced with Trump's pressure, Nicolas Maduro is reportedly making plans to flee to Nicaragua, where the government of his ally Daniel Ortega would offer shelter to him, his wife, and his children in case of political collapse. And there are several indications that point to this possibility. The Venezuelan presidential plane has made multiple suspicious flights to Nicaragua in recent weeks. This movement was confirmed by flight radar data, which detected flights by an Airbus A340 from the state-owned company Conviasa, regularly used by high-ranking Venezuelan officials. Although Nicolas Maduro and his family were not on board these flights, journalists claim that the plane was loaded with money and gold bars. This movement of resources to Nicaragua suggests that Nicolas Maduro is preparing for a possible scenario in which Trump orders his military forces to enter Venezuela, to capture him as the head of what they call the Cartel of the Suns. Nicaragua, under the dictatorship of Daniel Ortega, is still considered the main refuge for the Chavista regime in case of American intervention. On the other hand, the airports of Curaçao and Aruba are no longer allowing direct flights to Venezuela. They are being evaluated as potential starting points for American operations. Trinidad and Tobago has also indicated that it would cooperate with a possible United States military action. This shows how the pressure is closing in around Venezuela. Meanwhile, Brazil has also entered the game in a very interesting way. Lula announced a military operation called Atlas, mobilizing Army, Navy, and Air Force troops to states that border Venezuela, especially Roraima, which is just 30 kilometers from the border. Officially, the government says it's preparation for conference of the parties 30 the Climate Conference, which will take place in the Amazon. Despite this operation, there are already those who say that Brazil is also sending a message to Venezuela. It's a way to make it clear that Brazil is prepared to act if its national security interests are threatened. Now, speaking of national security, what would really happen if there were a direct confrontation between Venezuela and the United States? Well, in this scenario, Venezuela and its regional allies simply don't have the capacity to face the United States in a conventional war. The difference is overwhelming. Americans have a guided missile cruiser equipped with the Aegis system, which can track and engage hundreds of targets simultaneously to determine the nuclear attack submarines, more than 4,000 highly trained soldiers on board. On the other side, Venezuela has some Su-30 fighter jets, Russian-made, which are aging, old tanks that you saw in the images, and a navy that is basically a coastal defense force. Colombia has an experienced ground force because of decades of internal conflict, but it doesn't have the equipment to face a naval superpower. So why doesn't Maduro just give up? Many believe that he's betting on a strategy that the military calls the porcupine. The idea isn't to win a war, but to make any attack so politically costly that the adversary gives up. It's about raising the cost of escalation until it's no longer worth it. Venezuela has some SC-300 VM air defense systems made in Russia, capable of engaging aircraft and cruise missiles at long distances. There are many systems, but they can create no-fly zones and potentially shoot down American planes. And if an American military plane is shot down, with pilots killed or captured, the political situation in the United States becomes much more complicated. This political risk calculation is nothing new in American strategy. In fact, this same logic has already been tested before in similar situations. In 1962, it applied exactly the same tactic against Cuba during the missile crisis. He surrounded the island with warships, but called the operation a quarantine, not a blockade, because a blockade is considered an act of war under international law. The justifications also follow a familiar pattern. The United States invaded Panama in 1989, using the fight against drug trafficking as one of the main justifications, since General Manuel Noriega had been indicted for drug trafficking. And here we come to the most important point of this story. This crisis also reflects a larger competition between superpowers. That's because both China and Russia have important interests in Venezuela. These are interests that go far beyond ideology. China is Venezuela's largest creditor, with investments and loans totaling about $67 billion since 2007. If Maduro falls and a pro-American government takes over, all that money could go down the drain. Venezuela is an important source of oil and a market for its exports. Even more important, it's a way to have influence in the American Western Hemisphere. Russia has supplied advanced military equipment to Venezuela, including Su-30 fighter jets and S-300 defense systems. For Russia, keeping Maduro in power is a way to bother the United States, far from home, causing distractions that pull American resources and attention from places like Eastern Europe. Behind all this dispute between countries, there is an overwhelming human tragedy. Since 2014, more than 7.7 million Venezuelans have had to leave their country. To give you an idea of how big this is, it's as if 1 out of every 5 Venezuelans had left. When millions of people are fleeing a country, it stops being just that country's problem and becomes a problem for the whole region. Colombia had to absorb almost 3 million Venezuelans, and that overwhelmed hospitals, schools, increased competition for jobs, and also brought security problems. That's why Colombia has a direct interest in resolving the crisis in Venezuela. But why did so many Venezuelans flee? The country simply went bankrupt. Between 2014 and 2019, the Venezuelan economy shrank by 75%. It's as if the country lost 3/4 of all its wealth. Inflation rose so much that money was worth nothing anymore. A bill that could buy breakfast in the morning couldn't afford gum by afternoon. Violence exploded, with gangs controlling entire neighborhoods. The result was devastating. 85% of people ended up in poverty. And in this scenario, we can see that sending Colombian troops to the Venezuelan border goes far beyond ideology. It's a direct response to the concrete reality that Colombia faces every day. Petro may even disagree with Maduro politically, but he can't ignore that any major collapse in Venezuela will spill directly into his territory. Now, I want to know your opinion. Which country do you think will be most impacted if this crisis gets worse? Colombia, which has already received millions of refugees, or Brazil, which has the largest border with Venezuela? Leave your answer in the comments. Did the content help you understand this complex situation better? Subscribe to the channel and share it with your friends. See you in the next video. Attention. Attention. No more power to your people.